like to welcome everybody to the June 2017 Mississippi PowerShell User Group meeting. This month we've got David Christian speaking on working with Plaster. Go ahead and take it away, David.
Hey, good evening, everybody. So tonight's topic is going to be Plaster, PowerShell Scaffolding module. Really cool stuff, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So first off, who's this guy? So like Mike said, my name is David Christian. You guys can find me over at overpoweredshell.com. That's currently where I'm blogging at. I try to post, once a week, twice a week over there. Also active on GitHub and Twitter. Both of those links are dchristian3188. Feel free to reach out to me there. And I'm also trying to get the Southern California PowerShell User Group started. So myself and Kevin Marquette, we live out here in the Southern California area, and we're incredibly surprised and saddened to see that there's no communities out here. So we're targeting to get our first meeting off the ground out in August. So if you're in the area or if you wanted to attend remotely, looking to present remotely, please reach out to myself or Kevin. All right, all that out of the way. So what are we doing tonight? So for tonight, we're going to be talking about Plaster. So I'm going to tell you what Plaster is, why we care about it. We'll go through some of the commandlets in the Plaster module. Spoiler alert, there's only 4 commandlets that we have to learn. We're going to go through the default Plaster template. So Plaster ships with a template that we can use out of the box. We'll go through that one. We'll see what makes up a Plaster template, and then the really cool part. How do we make our own template and manifest, and how do we really customize this to get the most out of working with Plaster? All right, so Plaster is a PowerShell scaffolding module. And if you've ever worked with any other language, so think about if you've worked with C#. When you're working with C#, you have all these kind of pre-baked templates available to you. You can go into Visual Studio and you can hit New Project, and right in the editor you have options to create a new web service, a new console service, a new Windows service. And that's kind of the area that Plaster is trying to solve, or that gap that Plaster is trying to fill. There's nothing like that for PowerShell. There's snippets and there's code samples, but there's nothing in the PowerShell community that lets you kind of pre-bake a project. So that's what Plaster does. Now, Plaster is 100% open source, and it is maintained by the PowerShell team. You can find it on their GitHub. It's at PowerShell/Plaster, and you can find the latest version on the PS gallery. I believe the latest version is 1.0. Let's go ahead and take a look. Yep, 1.0.1. All right. So first thing I want to do is I kind of want to take a look at what commandlets do you get after you install Plaster. So if we look at our commandlets here, Plaster ships with 4 commandlets right out of the box. Get Plaster template, invoke Plaster template, new Plaster manifest, and test Plaster manifest. That's it. The reason for this is everything in Plaster kind of revolves around this concept of a manifest, and that's where most of our work is going to be done. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go through and let's take a look at the default Plaster manifest. So this is the one that comes with Plaster right out of the box. And we can do that by running our get Plaster template command. Right? When we run this, we get a couple of properties back from this template. We get the title, the author, what version the template is, descriptions for our template, tags, and our template path. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to load this template up into a variable. And then I'm going to run our second command there, invoke Plaster, and actually run this and see what it does. So invoke Plaster takes a couple of parameters. One parameter it takes is this template path, right? So that's going to be the path to where our manifest is. Now this always kind of trips me up when you're looking at a template, even though you have a manifest, you're not going to give the manifest path here. You're going to give the folder to it, right? So it's going to be the folder containing your manifest. Another parameter we're going to give is our output parameter, and where we're going to actually have Plaster create our files. So we'll go ahead. Let's invoke this manifest. And the first thing it's going to do, it's going to ask us for the name of my module. Let's say new Plaster module. The version number, why don't we change that a little bit? Let's say 1.0.0. Okay, it's asking us if we want to create a test directory and add pester test for module validation. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. It's asking us now what editor we should use. So Plaster, or this template, comes with a couple of options. We can use none or Visual Studio Code. I like Visual Studio Code. We see that that's also the default here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. So now we actually see that Plaster went ahead and created all of these files for us. So it created our PSD one, our PSM one. Since we chose to do tests, it included these tests. Also, since we chose our Visual Studio Code as our default editor, it gave us a couple of things to work with that. And then it verified Pester was installed. Okay, seems pretty cool. So let's see what that actually looks like. So I'm going to open up that folder in a new window. And we can see here is our PSM1, just a pretty bare skeleton PSM1. Our PSD1, notice that it did respect our module version that we passed in. Since we chose to include tests, it did include a basic test file. Let's see if we can run this. Okay, cool. And then we also chose the VS Code settings. Right, so let's see what it asked, or it set up for us for VS Code. So it looks like it created a settings file for some common settings for VS Code, and then a task file that we could use in VS Code. Okay, pretty cool. So that was neat, but I bet you guys are all thinking right now, that's not really the module structure that I use. And if that's all Plaster did, it wouldn't be as powerful. So the real magic is being able to create our own manifest and being able to customize that wizard and that output to what we want. So that's what we're going to do now. So let's go through it. First, we're going to start off by taking a look at our new Plaster manifest command. Just like you can probably guess, this command that creates a new manifest. Right? Up here at the top, we have our parameters that we can pass in. And what I did here is I just set up a couple of those into a hash table. So for this new manifest, I'm going to save it to this first demo Plaster manifest XML file. I'm going to give it a title, give it a template name. Kind of the difference between the title and the template name, if you want to think about it, is title is more of a friendly name, whereas template name's that single word identifier for it. We also have a template version, author, and our description. So I'm going to go ahead and load up my hash table and then go ahead and splat that in. Oh no. The demo gods, they failed me. Sorry guys, 1 second here. All right. There we go. So now let's take a look at this new manifest that command created. So here we see all of those properties that we pass in get translated over into this manifest. And yes, the manifest is XML. Ew, gross. So there's actually a couple of reasons why they chose to use XML. probably one of the biggest reasons to use XML is that XML provides a very, very tight schema. And if you actually notice up here, you can see that this XML document is bound to this Plaster schema. Excuse me. So what that does by binding it to that schema is it allows them to do very quick schema verification against your manifest. And actually, if you look at Plaster, module, one of our commandlets is that test Plaster manifest. And that's exactly what it's doing. It's comparing the manifest that you provided against that XML schema and seeing if it is valid. And what's actually great about that is if you make an error or there's a mistake, it points you right to the line number and it helps you correct it. It's pretty cool. All right. So going back to the template that this created, here we see our name, our ID, our version. And then I didn't include it here, but there is this tags section. And tags is just an array of strings. It's kind of like friendly identifiers if you wanted to say that this is a module, or this is for DSC, or this includes Plaster. You could do that in the tags as kind of those identifiers. All right. So now that we have this new manifest, let's go ahead and let's run it and see what it does. Oh, it does nothing. Well, that's not true. It shows us the Plaster manifest, or the Plaster logo, I should say. All right, time to break and figure out why. So there's more to a manifest than just setting up and running the new Plaster manifest command. Actually, a manifest can be broken up into 3 main sections. Those sections are metadata. Metadata is information about the manifest. Parameters. Parameters are the cool prompts that you see in the interaction with our user. And then the content. And the content is where we actually take those parameters and those prompts and we make files with them. So the first one we've kind of already talked about, and that's the metadata of the Plaster manifest. This is information about your manifest itself. And you know, this is the one that's super easy to generate because this is the one that has the commandlet, right? If we were looking at the metadata of our manifest, it's right here, right? Now, the next big block is the parameters. And there's a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind when we're working with these parameters. And the first is kind of what that end user experience is going to be like. Each of these parameters is going to go ahead and create a prompt to your user, right? It's also important because the order that you put these parameters, that's the order that they're going to get displayed. Another thing that you kind of want to be cognizant of is that each parameter is going to go ahead and create a variable. And we're going to swing back and we're going to talk a lot about Plaster variables in a few minutes, but just kind of keep that in the back of your head that each one of these parameters is a variable that I can use later on in my manifest. All right, so the first type of parameter that we can use is a text parameter. Really straightforward. It asks the user a question. It has a prompt, and then it creates a string variable for us. So let's go back and let's add a couple of prompts or parameters to our new module manifest. The first parameter that we're going to add here is going to be for the module name, right? And we'll see, we're just going to add it to the name section of the XML. We're going to say that this is a text prompt, and then what is that friendly message that that user is going to see? Kind of want to remember, this is what the user sees in their module. This is what you're going to get to interact with on the back end. So let's go ahead and we'll grab these 2 parameters. We're going to place them here in our parameter block. Save. We'll format our document. Great. Now let's go ahead and let's rerun that same manifest. So now we see our module name here with our prompt. And we'll do our description. Now, it still didn't do anything because we don't have the content, but as we get there, you'll see that this manifest drives this wizard, and we'll start getting it more and more filled out. All right. Another thing we can do with these parameters is that we can add a default value. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new version prompt here. You notice that the fields are exactly the same except for this default. And what's really cool about this is when we go ahead and we run this in Plaster.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
We've got a question wanting to know if the metadata is limited to what's defined on GitHub.
Let me see.
And they've got a specific link in the question.
Yes, it is. So if you're looking at the GitHub page here, for the metadata, these are the available fields that you can use. And this is actually the completed metadata block there for Plaster. Were you looking to maybe add your own type of metadata or looking to extend that schema?
Yeah, just as a curiosity, if it could be extended to specific things for the projects we're working on.
So what I would recommend for something like that is maybe look at utilizing tags, right? Where you could add a tag for those specific projects, and then later on when you're searching for your Plaster manifest, you can pull it from those tags.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, so let's go ahead and let's invoke this new manifest. So again, we have our module prompt here, our description. Now, we're coming to the prompt with our default value. And I kind of want to examine the manifest. I think this is really cool and a really nice feature of Plaster. My prompt just says version name. Plaster automatically sees the default and it'll append it here. So if you need to give kind of that feedback to your user, it's already doing it for you. You don't have to worry about putting that in your message. You kind of just get that for free. All right. So the next type of prompt that we have is a special type. Now, special types are very, very similar to text types with one exception. What these actually do is these will look at the current machine's GitHub config file. Currently, Plaster supports two special types, user full name and user email. What you can do is you can tag your parameter to use these values, and then if that user has GitHub installed on their machine, that gets pulled as the default. So let's go ahead, and I wanted to add a module author to this first manifest. So we'll grab our module author here. We'll paste it. Again, all the values are the same here, except I'm using that user full name type. Now, when we run it, there we go. For author, it looked at my GitHub config and it pulled back that value. All right. Another type of parameter we have is a choice type parameter. So these are great for those yes/no type questions. This is great if you want to present multiple options to the user, but you kind of want to enforce that one pick. If you think about this like a function, I like to think about this like putting a validate set on my parameter, right? So here we're controlling what options the user sees, and we're only allowing them to pick one of those options. Now, it's important to note that this variable or this type of choice is going to create a string variable for you on the back end. All right. So the choice I kind of want to use for this example is I want to see if the user wants to include pester tests. Now there's kind of two parts to this choice section. The first part here is the actual parameter block. This is where we're going to define the name. Again, this name is going to be the Plaster variable that's going to get created for us. The type of parameter, what prompt it's going to use, and then the default value. This is a little bit different than the default values on the text and fields that we saw before. Since this is actually a choice, this is a zero-based index into your choice options. So here I'm choosing default of 0. It's going to be our first choice down there. Now, after we set up that parameter block, we need to define our actual choices. I know the XML is a little bit weird, but we have our label, and then we do our ampersand and yes. That's what's going to get displayed to the user as that choice. That's the friendly label that the user sees. We have a help message, and then we get the value. And kind of the interaction here is if this user selects, the user selects this choice, it sets that value or that parameter, right? So depending on what they set here, they're going to populate this value. So let's go ahead and let's add these pester parameters to our module. Okay, let's go ahead and let's run this one more time. All right, here we go. Do we want to include pester tests? We see the labels here. And when we use these labels, it's usually the first letter that we're going to select. Now, you notice we have yes, no, or help. And actually hitting the help or that question mark is what's going to display that help message to the user. So it's not until they actually hit that question mark that they see those messages, but they all are there. All right, we'll choose our default and we'll keep going. So the next type of parameter we have is a multi-choice parameter. Very, very similar to the single choice, except this time it allows the user to select one or more. Again, like a validate set, but important to remember that this is going to create an array on the back end. So whereas our previous values were all strings, this one is going to give you an array that we have to interact with. Let's take a look at that. What I'm using for my example is I want to ask the user if they want to create folders for each of their projects. Right? It's very, very common when you're developing a module locally. You'll have a folder for your public functions, your private functions, any classes you define, binaries, data. And what this choice here essentially does is it asks the user if they want to implement that structure. So again, we start off with what variable name are we going to create, the type of choice, what that message is going to be, and our defaults here. Notice since this is an array, we actually can choose an array of choices. So if the user doesn't make a decision, we're going to include the public, the internal, and the classes folder for them. All right, let's go ahead and let's add that parameter. Format our document. Pester test, sure. And then here, we should see all of our options. If I want to override the options that it presents me, I can just choose the comma separated list of what I want. Perfect. All right. So we've covered a few of the parameter examples, and now we kind of want to switch gears, and I want to actually make stuff with this. And the way we do that is with our content block. So inside of our content block, we have a couple of different types of content. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the Plaster RUNSPACE. So, as I mentioned earlier, each one of your prompts creates a variable that you can use in Plaster. Where you use that variable is in this RUNSPACE that Plaster will actually create for you. And it's really cool. And let me bring up the page here. And the reason I say it's really cool is the way this was designed, it was designed as a constrained RUNSPACE. So, you know, it's kind of troubling if you think about it that you're going to have a Plaster manifest that has arbitrary PowerShell code and that you're going to just run it and you're going to get it from other people and just run it. So to kind of control that, the team limited the scope of what you can actually get to inside of Plaster's RUNSPACE. So the actual commands that you can use are down here. Right? So you can use a couple of these get commands, and then you can access the environment and the file system provider. That's it. Also, I want you to notice you don't see any new items in here. You don't see any remove items in here. Anytime you need to create something, that actually has to be done through the Plaster API and those Plaster commandlets and manifest. Now, another thing that you're going to have access to inside of this Plaster RUNSPACE is a couple of these variables. So Plaster will automatically create variables for certain things inside of this RUNSPACE. Some of those variables are, you know, the Plaster template, destination, name. They give you a couple of GUIDs here if you need a couple of GUIDs, the date and the time. Another thing that's also going to be created for you is the Plaster automatic variables. Now, the Plaster automatic variables are the ones that are created by your parameters. So each one of those is going to start with Plaster underscore parameter underscore your parameter name. For example, earlier we had a parameter where we asked the user for what the module name was. If I want to reference that module name anywhere else inside of my manifest, I can do it here using that same syntax. All right, so that's just Plaster underscore param and then the module name that you provided over here in your parameter. All right, any questions on the RUNSPACE or those automatic variables? Okay. All right, so with that out of the way, when you're working with these content elements, you have access to that RUNSPACE, and you can access that RUNSPACE in pretty much any field and pull those variables down. So let's take a look at the new module manifest content element. So this is an element that Plaster provides, and this is for creating module manifests. Right? There's a couple of different parameters here. And what I'm basically doing is I'm filling them out with those values that I got from my user and I got from the prompt. Here you see we're pulling module name, module version, our author, and then our module description. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab that block. Then I'm going to go ahead and put it in here. Now, the next type of content we have is file content. And file content is just if you have a source file that you want to copy every time, or if you want to bring over, do no modification to it, you use the content element for file. So let's take a look at that. In my example, we were making a module. So what I have here is a very, very basic and generic PSM1 file. What this generic PSM1 file will do is it'll look to see if you have a public, internal, or classes folder. for each one of those, test to see if that folder exists in the module. If it does, it'll dot source each one of those functions and then essentially export those functions, at least the ones in the public folder. So I like this module template. I want to just bring it over every time. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this source file in the same location with my Plaster manifest. Now, when you're working with these source files or template files, it's important to note that everything is relative to your Plaster manifest. Normally, what I like to do, and what you should be doing as well, is you should create a new folder for each of your manifests. So each manifest gets its own folder. Inside that folder will be the manifest XML, as well as any corresponding help or documents that you might need with it. All right. So now that we got that file in the same location, you see I'm referencing it here in our file content element. We're saying that that's the source file name. And the destination, again, is going to be another one of those Plaster variables. So we'll figure out what the module name is, and we'll copy it over there. So let's get that into our manifest. Now, the thing that makes the content section incredibly powerful is the Plaster conditionals. So Plaster conditionals are available to all of your content elements. And what they actually do is they'll evaluate a script block. So inside of your content, you can say, run this script block first, and if that script block evaluates to true, then I want you to add the content. If it doesn't, I want you to go ahead and skip it. So let's see what an example of that would look like. One of the things that I wanted to do is we asked the user if they wanted pester tests for this module. If they did, we want to make a pester test folder for them, as well as copy over this file. So here I have a basic test. Nothing too crazy. Basically checks to see if all of the files inside of that module are valid PowerShell. Can the PS Analyzer pick them up without choking? And then can the module import cleanly? Pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but hey, it's something. So I'll move this over to my source files. And if the user included pester tests, we want to add these two content elements. So here you see the same file block that we had before, but now we have this new conditional here. This new conditional here. And again, that conditional is just a script block. Any script block that you can run or you can think of, you can do inside of here. We have access to those Plaster parameters in here. So what I'm doing is I'm saying if the user selected pester, well then let's go ahead and let's make a test folder. Also, if they selected pester, let's go ahead and let's copy our basic test file over to that new test folder. So let's get those two guys in there. All right. We're going to do the same thing for our function folders. We don't want to just go ahead and create, the public internal classes and all those folders every time. We only want to do those when the user selects those options. So what the conditional looks like there is if that Plaster param functions folder contains those folder names, right? That's going to evaluate to true. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new folder. And sorry if I didn't mention this, the syntax to create a new folder is just the destination. You give it a blank source. That'll go ahead and give you a blank folder or an empty folder. All right. Let's move these conditionals over. Now, We can also do messages inside of our manifests. Messages, just like they sound. Right? This is a way for us to display information to our user. You notice here, inside the message body, I do have full access to that RUNSPACE. This is going to go ahead and get expanded out, and we'll actually see what the value is in there. Don't want the message down here, though. We want the message actually right there in front of the folders. It is important to note that these manifests, they execute from top to bottom, so that the order you do see them in here is the order the user is going to see them. And that's both for the parameter block as well as the content block. Messages also support conditionals too. So this is great if you don't always want to show the same message, or if your message is truly dependent on some value being set. Let's go ahead and let's add a message here in front of our pester parameters or folder creation. Again, it's going to check for the same thing. And if it is, it's just going to leave a message to the user saying that it did create those folders. All right. Messages can also be multi-line. You can also get crazy in here. You can do some ASCII art. I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and I figured why not use a Dalek for our multi-line message example. So let's go ahead. Let's just copy this body back in here, and we'll paste that at the end of our manifest. All right. So we've been working with this manifest. Let's go ahead and let's run it. Let's see what it does. And let me just bring this up here a little bit. Oh no, we have an error in our manifest. Let's see if we can find out where. Oh, I think I already see it. And let's try to put this back in. There we go. So let's see. My first Plaster module does stuff. Sure, let's keep that version number. Keep that author. I do want tester tests. And you know what? Those default folders sound just great. So there we go. We see that Plaster created my PSD1 and PSM1. It displayed my messages because we did choose Pester. And it even displayed my little ASCII art here down at the bottom. Awesome.
I have a quick question on the creating the folder structure. If you have a standard folder tree that you want to create, if you give it a source to copy, is it recursive, or do you have to create each level?
If you give it a source to copy, so if you, what I would do here for your source, so if this source had nested folders in it, it would copy all of those nested folders in. So I guess, yes, it is recursive copy. Another option you can use if you have that big list of folders, if you don't want to have to type that out manually what those source folders are, when you actually create a manifest, there is a switch on it called Add Content here. And basically what you do is you run the Add Content on new Plaster manifest, and you point that at an existing folder, and that'll move that folder and basically fill out that content section for you. It won't be perfect, obviously it won't have any conditionals or variable replacement, but it'll at least get that initial work for you done up front.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, any other questions? All right, let's go ahead and let's clean up that, and let's keep going here. So another thing we can do is we can use this content type of required modules. So what required modules does is it's a check. It's something that's just built in. You can give it a module name, module min-max version, and as part of your template creation, it'll go ahead and check to see if that version is installed on your system. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to go out and install it for you. It's not going to remove an incompatible version. It's just going to display a message, but it is there and the logic is there to at least get that kind of check-in for you. So I think it's a good idea. Since we chose an option for Pester, we should have our module checked to see if Pester is installed. And again, we don't always want to run this validation. We're going to run it on that condition. So again, we're using that same condition for our other ones. If they did choose Pester, we'll go ahead and we'll execute this. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm just saying that they need to have a module called Pester, at least this version. And if they don't, here's the message that we're going to give them. Let's see what that looks like. And actually, I want to put this closer to my Pester stuff here. All right. I'm just going to next through this. Okay, great. You see here, this verify section. Pester is installed on my machine, so our verify passed. But let's change this a little. Let's make it so I'm living in the future, and we got to get version 8.4 of Pester. Let's see how it handles this. Let me just go back and clean up my folder. All right. Uh-oh, there we go. All right, here we can see I failed to verify. It tells us exactly what's missing, and then here is the error message that I chose to include. All right, let's set that back so we can keep working. And I think at this point we're done for a basic module. Let's go ahead and let's see what that created for us. Here's that My Module test. Here is our generic PSM1, copied over, the correct name. Here's our module manifest. Looks like it pulled my name correctly and our version and all that fun stuff. It did include our test folder. Here's our tests, right where they should be. Let's see, can we actually run it? Ooh. Nope, can't run it because my module manifest doesn't work yet. That's fair. And then we have our empty folders. All right. Any questions so far on working with those the parameters, some of those context blocks, any of that? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
When you have the requires function, is there a way to make the other steps conditional upon that passing? So not creating the Pester test folder and structure if it doesn't have the Pester module installed, for example?
That's a good one. I don't think so. If we look back at the actual constrained run space, so it wouldn't create a variable for you if that failed. That's the first challenge. Also, if we look back at the run space, you know what? What you could do is you do have get module available to you. What you could do in your Pester conditional for if we were going back to here, so what your pester conditional then essentially would need to be, it would need to be if the user selected pester, right, and get module list available, right, had pester available on the system, then you would go ahead and proceed that way. I think one of the challenges with that, though, is you just want to be real clear with your messages to the user, right? Probably throw in that requires so they can visually see that. I would probably also do another follow-up message. If they did choose pester and I said, no, you're not going to get it because of the module, I'd want to make that very clear to the end user as well.
Yeah.
All right. So that was it for the module example. I have a couple of other content blocks I wanted to show you guys. And what we're going to do is we're going to finish those other content blocks up in a different example for a function. So with this function, let me just bring everybody up to speed here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder to hold my function. And before this demo, I put together a function manifest, at least the content and the parameter section. So I got that all pre-staged. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So for my function template, metadata, pretty boring, right? It's a function template. I'm the author. Yeah. So our parameters for this function, we're going to ask for a function name. It's going to be text. We're going to ask the user if they want comment-based help. It's going to be a yes/no. We're going to ask the user if they want pipeline support, what type of commandlet binding they want, simple or advanced. They advanced, we give them everything. And then I like to use the computer name parameter a lot, especially when I'm writing my own modules and stuff. So I have a switch on there for this template. Hey, do you want to add computer name? And if they do, it kind of puts that skeleton, parameter for the computer name, sets it as a string, does all that fun stuff. Okay. So let's see what that module or that manifest currently looks like. My function. Sure. Yep. Oh, advanced. Okay, and again, there's no content, so it doesn't actually do anything yet. So the first type of new content block is a modify. And what a modify does is it allows you to run a regex against a file. Now, one important caveat with this is that you still need to copy the file as part of your manifest. And what I mean by that is here is the file that I want to move over. I'm going to move it into my destination using a files content block, just like we did before. Right. Now the actual modification is going to happen here in a separate block. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this modify over. What this modify is saying, let's just bring this up, is what is the path to the file that we're going to modify. Again, it's that same path that we just copied over. We have this replace block, what string we're going to replace, and then what are we going to replace it with. And then here I'm using expand true. What that means is that's going to expand that substitute or that variable here. So we're saying we're going to expand or replace this string with our new function name from our user. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add that to our manifest. Again, that is a two-step process, right? We need to first copy the file over and then modify it. And then I do have the file here just so we can all take a look at that. It's a test file, very, very straightforward. Here's the string that we're going to be replacing, and the test is, it should have real tests. That seems accurate. All right. So that is a modify, right? We bring the file over, we run some regex against it, we're done. To be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of the modify. What I am a big fan of, though, is this next one, is the template file. So template files are incredibly powerful in Plaster. This is probably where you get the most value and the most bang for your buck. And probably the best way to learn about template files is to just look at one. So here I have a template file. Now the syntax for these template files is a little bit weird. And the way it works is we have a special escape sequence inside these template files. And that escape sequence is this alligator %. So you see this alligator % and this alligator % here correspond as one escape sequence. The way the template files work is everything inside of these alligators gets run through the Plaster constrained run space, gets evaluated, and then essentially goes out string. So here, what's going to happen is this is going to get evaluated, this is going to get replaced with my function name, and then that entire string is going to be sent here. Now we can also just have regular hard-coded values here. You see this bracket? This bracket's going to be there either way. It's outside of those alligators. So it's just there inside the file. Here is another one of those escape script blocks. And we can actually do some pretty advanced processing in here. So what I'm doing inside of this script block is I'm saying, did the user ask for help or ask to include help? And if they did include help, I want to have this here string echoed out and then replaced inside of the body of these alligators. If you guys have ever worked kind of with PHP or old web development programming, that's what this reminds me of, where you have your kind of HTML file, and you have your result file, and you have inline scripts that are getting evaluated and that are formatting the file. It feels very, very familiar if you kind of think about it from that standpoint. And what this text file is it's basically a bunch of these little executed scripts or evaluated script sections that kind of build up what I want that function to look like depending on what the user chose. Any questions on this part of it? All right, so now that we have our function file, and we know what it looks like, we can go ahead and we can add this to our content block. And I really like these because these are incredibly straightforward, right? Here's the template file block, here's our source, here's our destination. Plaster will go ahead and take care of all the magic, evaluating all the strings, doing the manipulation, doing the replace, and just dump it out here for you. I also like that whereas the modify was a two-step process, this is a one-step, just done. All right. Well, let's see if we didn't break it too bad. Let's go ahead and let's run our new manifest. New user group. I do want to include comment-based help. Yep, let's do a begin, process, and end. I want advanced commandlet help. And again, I want to do a parameter for the computer name. So here we go. We see that Plaster created our PS1. It modified the new one, and then it updated it, and then it finally created the last one. All right, let's take a look at that folder. And here we go. Here's our completed file. See our advanced commandlet binding. Here's our computer name parameter. And then here's that for each on those computers. And then if we have test, we should have our test there. Looks like our regex replace worked. All right. I think that's it for the big parameter and content blocks. Using all of those, you can kind of build up any manifest you want. What's also really neat about this, and I want to kind of stress to people, is that it's not just modules and functions, right? You can use Plaster to create any type of file structure, any type of pre-canned template, whatever. You can do that, and you can use your existing PowerShell skills to do that. One thing that I think is really cool, and I kind of wanted to talk about, is in preparation for this talk, I went back and I was really getting in there playing with Plaster, looking at some of the source code, and kind of just getting a better understanding of it. And one thing that blew my mind was that you can actually skip the wizard altogether. And Plaster will do this really neat thing that it'll look at your incoming manifest and it'll create a dynamic parameter for that parameter inside your manifest. So what that means is you can use splatting and you can use your full PowerShell language and automation skills to kind of create these controller scripts to go through and invoke these Plaster templates. And to kind of show you what I mean, let's say that you were working on a module to create DC web servers, whatever the heck a DC web server is. So you're working on this new module, and you want all your modules to be consistent. So right now, you know that you have to create a new DC web server commandlet, a get DC web server commandlet, a set, and a remove. You could go ahead and create one and then copy it over, or you could use your Plaster template and loop through these and do it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get my verbs, put them in an array, and then I'm going to do a for each on those. And then with those, I'm going to create my new function name, and I'm going to choose what options I want for those. You can turn off the Plaster logo. I kind of like it. I like seeing it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to leave it on. But let's go ahead and let's run this. Actually, before I do, I want to just clean up my previous folder. All right. So let's go ahead and let's run this script. And there we go. We see that Plaster is going through and it's running through and it's creating those test files, creating my folder files, and now everything is going to be 100% consistent. It's going to be unique. It's going to be following that pattern, and it should just work. Let's see if my pester tests work. Oh, my pester tests work. Awesome. All right. Kind of the last little tip I wanted to talk to you guys today about was tagging modules. So this is a really, really neat feature. What you can do is inside of your module manifest, you can actually leave a tag for Plaster. And what I mean by that is I created my own module. And all this module is Plaster templates. That's it. So I have a template for my function, I have a template for my module, and it has the corresponding files that go with it. Now, my module manifest isn't exporting any functions, isn't exporting any aliases, any DSC resources, anything special like that. It could, but it's not. But what it is doing is it is tagged for Plaster. And it's tagged here in this PS data extensions. And by tagging the module here, you can say that this module has Plaster extensions and that it extends template paths. So what this means is if you have a module installed that extends Plaster, when you run the get Plaster template, you can do include installed modules. And this will actually look at your installed modules, look at those manifests, and see if any one of your modules has Plaster extensions. And if it does, it'll make that template available to you. Now, what's so powerful about that is that means that we can distribute our Plaster templates as modules inside the PS gallery, right? Because it's just any module. So you can just create a module, put all your templates in there, and put it up to share. Or even better, let's say that you created a new module or a new DSL. A DSL is perfect for something like this. Let's say you created a new PowerShell DSL that you want people to start using. What you can do is inside of your module for that DSL, you can leave a tag for Plaster, and then as people install your module, and they do a get Plaster template, they'll have that available to their system, and they'll be able to start using it immediately. Pretty cool stuff. All right, guys, that's all I had for Plaster. Is there any questions?
I want to thank you, David, for taking the time to present for us.
Yeah, no problem. I hope it was helpful.
Definitely. I'm glad we recorded it because I want to go back and look at a couple of things that you covered.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that all of the materials are on my GitHub. If you head over to GitHub, dchristian3188, there is a repository demo working with Plaster. It has, this PowerPoint as well as all the PowerShell code and templates there are available.
Okay, if we've got any questions, or if any of you guys have a question and don't have a microphone, just feel free to type it in the chat or unmute if you have a question you'd like to ask.
I don't have any additional questions, but I just wanted to say thank you for answering the questions I had during the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. If you guys think of anything or if you do run into any trouble, please feel free to reach out to me, Twitter, GitHub, what have you. I'm always out there, always looking to help out. Oh, I see Charles typing.
And Plaster is limited to Visual Studio Code, is that correct?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
It does work in the PowerShell console. It works in the ISC. I feel like the pop-ups in the ISC, though, are a little weird. I think they use a different API. Whereas inside the code, we saw our pop-ups down here in the console. In the ISC, they give you the real goofy, like their own window, and you don't see the help. But it does work.
Okay, that's good to know. For some reason, I was thinking it was limited to Visual Studio Code, but it's good to know that it works across the board.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the way the ISC implements their prompts. They're doing something. It's just goofy, and like I said, I'm wondering in Vagrant, were you getting them in like their own pop-up window? Ah, gotcha. Yeah. Yep. All right. Is there anything else, guys? I don't know if we want to call it. Give everybody a couple more minutes.
Yeah, this recording, what I normally try to do when the recordings do work out, and this one appears it will, is I try to post them a week after the meeting, so it'll be next Tuesday. And I try to go back and view it and trim off the beginning, but this one seems pretty straightforward. It should be easy.
Awesome.
Okay, it looks like that must be it for all the questions. You guys have a great night.